Hello, everybody. It is currently Saturday evening. The NFL draft has just finished up, and before we get into the history by mail, just recap there are three teams whose sanity I truly began to question this draft, being the Atlanta Falcons, completely overstretching to draft a quarterback after they signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year deal. Then, in response to that, the Denver Broncos completely overdrafting, or I should say overreaching, to get Bo Nix. And then the Buffalo Bills first trading down with Kansas City and then trading out of the first round completely. I am so confused. So confused. I think the Steelers had a pretty impressive first 2 days. Day 3 was very whelming. But to get Troy Fautanu and Zach Frazier without having to trade up is a miracle. And then to get Roman Wilson, who I wasn't even looking at because I figured there would be no way he would fall to the Steelers, especially down to the third round. And then Peyton Wilson, who, injuries, we will see. I'm cautiously optimistic. Day 3, complete wash. I don't know why they drafted a guard and then an undersized defensive tackle and then a late 6th round cornerback. Granted, the cornerback's 6'3", but I don't know. Anyway, one more rambling thing. I said Jank Pack Thursday was cursed a la Spinal Tap, and it was. It took me 3 hours to try to actually get that thing spliced into one video. My normal program kept corrupting it, which is why I had to use an internet thing. So we almost spinal tapped our way right out the back door. But we didn't. And now, history by mail. Love some history by mail. And I think this might be the last in the series they were doing on civil rights. But let us take a look at the document. If I can open it. There it is. Okay, what do we have here? Amendment offered by Mrs. Bolton of Ohio. Accepted February 10th, 1964. Page 3 and 5 after engrossing copy. Okay, wait, so this is amendment offered by Smith. What in the world? By Mr. Reed of New York, training and retraining on the job. What in the world is this? I don't know, but we're about to find out because that is the good thing about history by mail. All right. The engrossing copy, of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, June 20th, 1963. Enclosed are pages from the engrossing copy of House Resolution 7152, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Engrossing is the process by which a bill is updated with amendments as the bill makes its way through the U.S. House or Senate. The word sex was inserted as one such amendment, and this addition became a major tool in advancing women's rights. The Civil Rights Act forbade discrimination in hiring, promoting, and firing based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. After the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments banned slavery, provided for equal protection of citizens under the law, and protected the right to vote. However, discrimination and segregation were still widespread. Jim Crow laws forced segregation throughout the South after the Supreme Court ruled in the 1895 Plessy v. Ferguson case that segregation laws were constitutional if they provided separate but equal treatment, and that led to a whole bunch of problems. The civil rights movement began to gain traction after the landmark 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown v. the Board of Education of Topeka. We actually had something like that, I think, earlier in one of the earlier history by mails, which ruled separate educational facilities are inherently unequal and thus a violation of the 14th Amendment. The next year, the Montgomery bus boycott, which had been sparked by Rosa Parks' arrest, produced court-ordered city bus integration. We had that one last month. After a tumultuous decade of civil rights activity, President John F. Kennedy urged Americans in a televised address on June 6, 1963, to treat all people equally, regardless of race. JFK then proposed legislation to address discrimination in voting, public places, federal programs, and more. Kennedy's proposal was controversial as he was suggesting legislation to bring about major social change. The following week, Kennedy submitted House Resolution 7152 to Congress. JFK lobbied to gain bipartisan support for the bill, but was assassinated in November of 1963. President Lyndon B. Johnson and Martin Luther King Jr. continued to garner support for the resolution. Sex is a protected category. In the House version of the bill, the addition of the word sex to the protected categories was proposed by Representative Howard Smith of Virginia. Smith was the chairman of the House Rules Committee, which determines the rules for debating a proposed bill. Critics argued Smith added the word to make it more difficult to pass Congress, as the bill had previously failed to do so when proposed in 1950, and Smith was known to be opposed to the advancement of civil rights. Smith's civil rights leanings were clarified after he protested the decision in Brown v. the Board of Education. In 1957, he said in the House Rules Committee, "The Southern people have never accepted the colored race as a race of people who had equal intelligence, and the white people of the South." However, Smith claimed his support for the inclusion of gender in the bill was due to his long-term relationship with Alice Paul, a women's rights activist who had supported some of Smith's pro-business policies in the past. Regardless of Smith's intent, Democratic Congresswoman Martha Griffiths of Michigan and Margaret Chase Smith of Maine, two of only 12 congresswomen, worked to keep the word sex in the bill when the suggestion arose in the committee to remove it. Tension between women's rights and African American rights advocates had existed for decades. Women's rights advocates, thought legislation protecting African Americans would leave white women unprotected, while African American rights advocates thought white women still had more rights than African Americans, and priority in effort and resources should go to African American advocacy. Lobbying for the sex amendment was almost universally from women's organizations, while African American organizations with very few female leaders feared the amendment would hurt the bill's chances. The word sex was added to the bill through engrossing. A reading clerk made edits while amendments were offered by representatives during the House debate of the bill. Smith proposed amending the bill to add the word sex to several lines of the bill, which would protect women from discrimination in employment. Ironically, on the engrossing form itself, the line to indicate the congressperson offering the amendment had been pre-printed with the words, "Amendment offered by Mr." The word Mr. on the form had to be corrected by hand to Mrs., and we did see that on the other side of this. After the amendment offered by Congresswoman Frances Bolton of Ohio. Okay, that's why I did not recognize the name. The final version of the bill made it illegal for an employer, quote, to discriminate against any individual with respect to his compensation, terms, conditions, or privileges or employment because of such individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, end quote. Title VII of the Act created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to oversee the implementation of the new law and became the basis of promoting workplace equality. The congressional vote. It was not easy for the Civil Rights Act to pass Congress. Democrats held a majority in both houses, and many were from southern states whose constituents wanted to uphold the Jim Crow laws. Southern senators planned to delay the vote in hopes of violent protests emerging in the meantime. After 70 days of public hearings, testimony by over 275 witnesses producing nearly 6,000 pages, over 100 amendments to the bill, and 9 days of debate on the House floor, the bill passed the House with a vote of 289 to 126. Two women shouted from the House Visitors Gallery, "We've won, and we've made it," and had to be removed by guards. The process in the Senate was even more intense. Opponents were concerned the bill would expand federal powers beyond those which are constitutionally granted. Senate Democrats launched one of the longest filibusters in American history, lasting 57 days. That's impressive. Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia gave a 14-hour and 13-minute speech. 67 votes were needed for a motion of cloture to overcome the Senate filibuster. Republican Illinois Senator Everett Dirksen, the president, The Senate Minority Leader rose to speak, noting that the day marked the 100th anniversary of President Lincoln's nomination to a second term. He then quoted the words of Victor Hugo, "Stronger than all the armies is an idea whose time has come." The clerk proceeded to call the roll to determine the votes for cloture. I think that's how it's pronounced. When he reached California Senator Claire Engel, there was silence in the room. A brain tumor had prevented the critically ill senator from speaking. Senator Engel slowly raised his arm and pointed to his eye, signaling his affirmative vote. The final vote was 71 to 29, and the filibuster was defeated. The Senate voted 73 to 27 to approve the bill. Several hours after congressional approval, on July 2nd, 1964, President LBJ signed the bill into law in the company of Martin Luther King Jr., Roy Wilkins, and other civil rights leaders. The aftermath of the passage. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a landmark piece of legislation. Not everyone was pleased with the act, however. Some white supremacist groups started protests, violently attacked African Americans, and promoted pro-segregation political candidates. Just a few months after the act became law, its constitutionality was challenged and upheld in the U.S. Supreme Court in the case of Heart of Atlanta Motel versus the U.S., which ruled that the U.S. Congress had the power to force private businesses to comply with the Civil Rights Act. House Resolution 7152 was the nation's most sweeping piece of civil rights legislation since the post-Civil War era. The act outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, required equal access to public places and employment, and enforced desegregation of schools. It did not end discrimination, but it did open the door to further progress. A door which still remains open, and we must continue to walk through it because there's a lot of good stuff on the other end of that, believe you me. When we can all get along, can you just imagine what we'll be able to accomplish? But that is going to do it for this Sunday. Some food for thought, as it were. The previous 4 months were on the civil rights movement. Curious to see what they do, because they do it in quarters. In this being April, May will begin the new, not quarter, because there's not 16 months, period, I guess, or era of the year. So the first third of the month, there we go, was the civil rights movement. Second third, can't wait to see, but we will find out that in about a month or so. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope you had a great weekend, and we will see you next time.